Johnny had always been the quiet one, the person who preferred to stay in the shadows while his colleagues basked in the spotlight. But that was before Matt, an ambitious young employee, decided to make a habit of taking credit for Johnny's hard work. It started small, innocuous even. A presentation here, a report there, but slowly, it became a pattern. Johnny watched as Matt, with a knowing grin, took his ideas, his strategies, and passed them off as his own in front of their boss, Mr. Thompson. It wasn't just about the work, it was about the power dynamics. Johnny could feel the subtle shift in the office. Every time Matt outshone him, it was a reminder that his ideas had value, but his recognition was stolen. And all of this came with a price. It was an invisible toll, one that gnawed at his patience, chipped away at his self-esteem, and yet, Johnny remained composed. He wasn't one to explode in frustration or confront Matt directly. No, Johnny was smarter than that. He had a plan. At first, Johnny tried the diplomatic route. He made a few comments to Mr. Thompson, suggesting that his ideas were being appropriated, but nothing came of it. Matt was too good at playing the game. He would always manage to dodge any subtle accusations, keeping his reputation intact. It wasn't long before Johnny realized that direct confrontation wouldn't work. If he wanted to regain control, he needed to be more subtle. He began leaving Matt little clues in the form of emails. At first, they were nothing more than small notes, almost unnoticeable if you didn't know what to look for. A mention of Matt's past mistakes, a reminder about some overlooked detail in his report from last month, a gentle nudge about a mishap during a client presentation that only Johnny had witnessed. These clues weren't directly accusatory, they didn't scream, "Matt messed up," but they were enough to make him doubt himself. To plant the seed of insecurity in his mind. And Johnny watched with satisfaction as Matt, ever the perfectionist, began to feel the pressure. It was a quiet war, a battle fought not with words, but with the power of suggestion. Johnny wasn't trying to expose Matt's faults outright, he was building a slow burn. The goal wasn't to make Matt collapse immediately, but to erode his confidence just enough so that, when the time came, the tables would turn. Slowly but surely, Johnny watched as Matt started to make mistakes, small at first, but then growing bigger and harder to ignore. The perfect illusion of competence Matt had built began to crack. Johnny could sense that things were shifting. Matt, once so confident in front of Mr. Thompson, was starting to second-guess himself. His presentations faltered, his reports were filled with errors, and his confidence was beginning to crack. Johnny, on the other hand, had kept his head down and let his work speak for itself. He knew that his time would come. But Johnny wasn't just sitting back and waiting for Matt to trip up. He was laying the groundwork for something far more devious, a masterstroke that would not only expose Matt's incompetence but also secure his own place in the office hierarchy. Johnny was about to unleash the ultimate revelation that would make sure Matt's rise was abruptly halted, and his own talents were finally recognized. The time was coming, and Johnny was ready. The stage was set. Johnny's plan was in full swing, and as Matt stumbled through his increasingly erratic performances, Johnny remained a ghost in the background, a silent orchestrator of his downfall. But the real brilliance of Johnny's strategy wasn't just in the subtle clues he'd planted. It was in the way he'd slowly begun to manipulate Matt's own paranoia. The emails were only part of the game. Johnny was playing a deeper psychological chess match, and Matt was his pawn. It didn't take long for Matt to start questioning his own competence. Johnny made sure to never directly accuse him of anything, never openly criticize him. No, that wasn't Johnny's style. Instead, he let the little mistakes grow until they could no longer be ignored. The emails were designed to be like whispers in the wind, easy to overlook, yet always there, growing in number, slowly drowning Matt in his own doubt. Matt began to lose track of the details. Small things that Johnny had pointed out in his emails, like a miscalculation in a financial report or a small client detail Matt had overlooked, started to snowball. Matt would be in meetings, his confidence wavering, while Johnny stood by, composed and silent, watching as Matt tried to cover up the cracks. It was painful for Matt to realize, but deep down, he knew something wasn't right. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the ground beneath him felt unstable. Johnny made sure to escalate the pressure ever so slowly. He watched with a quiet satisfaction as Matt began to look over his shoulder more often. When Matt would deliver a report or pitch an idea, Johnny would make sure to ask questions, just enough to sow doubt. "Did you check the numbers again? I thought I saw a discrepancy last week." Or, "Is that really what the client asked for? I could have sworn they mentioned something different in the meeting." These comments weren't aggressive, they were just subtle enough to make Matt doubt himself. The subtlety of Johnny's sabotage was like a slow poison. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a direct challenge. It wasn't even about Matt's incompetence, it was about making him feel incompetent. Johnny never had to say the words, he didn't need to. Matt's growing self-doubt, coupled with the pressure from their boss, was doing the work for him. Meanwhile, Johnny kept a close eye on Mr. Thompson, watching for any signs of favoritism toward Matt. He knew that once the promotion cycle came around, it would be the perfect opportunity to seal his victory. But Johnny had to be patient. If he rushed, if he acted too quickly, it would all unravel. He had to make sure that when the time came, Matt was on the edge of a meltdown. Only then could Johnny step in and take the credit for everything. Johnny's strategy was a delicate dance. He had to make Matt feel isolated, make him question his position in the office without ever confronting him directly. And as Matt faltered, Johnny quietly began to step forward. His work was impeccable. His ideas were brilliant. And he had made sure that, over the past few months, his contributions had been carefully documented, backed by undeniable proof. All Johnny needed now was the right moment. A slip, a crack, anything that would finally push Matt over the edge. Johnny didn't need to do anything spectacular. He just needed to be there when Matt finally collapsed under the weight of his own insecurity. And when that moment came, Johnny knew exactly what he would do. Johnny wasn't out for revenge in the traditional sense. He wasn't angry. He was just letting the inevitable happen. Matt had made his own bed. Johnny was merely the one to make sure it was never comfortable for him again. It was all about power, influence, and patience. And in time, Johnny would be the one in control. As the days dragged on, the tension in the office grew palpable. Matt, once the picture of confidence, had become increasingly unsteady. His once pristine reports were now riddled with errors, and his presentations, once his greatest strength, became the subject of awkward silences. Johnny had become a silent observer, standing back and watching the cracks appear in Matt's carefully constructed facade. But Johnny wasn't just biding his time, he was executing his plan with precision. Each little whisper he planted in Matt's mind, each subtle suggestion, was designed to make Matt question his every move. It wasn't enough for Matt to make an occasional mistake, it was about making him doubt his own competence, to a point where every decision, every idea, became a struggle. Johnny's emails, now increasing in frequency, were like breadcrumbs leading Matt down a path of self-doubt. He'd expertly refer to past instances where Matt had forgotten crucial details, subtle enough to appear as casual observations but biting enough to sting. It was the perfect kind of psychological warfare, invisible, but effective. And the worst part for Matt was that he couldn't figure out where the pressure was coming from. Was it his own mistakes catching up with him? Was it the growing demands of Mr. Thompson? Or was someone actively undermining him? Matt's paranoia grew. He started double-checking everything, making sure to go over reports with a fine-tooth comb, scrutinizing every detail with the same obsessive intensity that had once made him a standout employee. But no matter how hard he tried, things kept slipping through the cracks. Small errors turned into bigger ones, and before long, his once dominant presence in the office began to fade into the background. He couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't right. Johnny, on the other hand, knew exactly what was happening. As Matt's world began to crumble, Johnny remained unshaken. His work was flawless. His ideas, while often overshadowed by Matt, were now taking center stage. The more Matt faltered, the more Johnny's brilliance stood in stark contrast. He became the quiet hero of the office, the one who everyone knew could be counted on when things went wrong. Mr. Thompson noticed the shift, though he wasn't as quick to connect the dots as Johnny would have hoped. He was preoccupied with his own responsibilities, but he couldn't ignore the increasing tension around Matt's performance. The mistakes, the missed deadlines, and the increasingly disorganized presentations were starting to take their toll. Johnny, always the composed one, began to step in at the right moments, offering solutions, providing backup for Matt's failing ideas. He wasn't doing it out of kindness, no, Johnny was positioning himself as the steady, reliable force that the office could lean on. As weeks passed, Johnny found himself increasingly at the forefront of discussions. While Matt struggled with mounting pressure, Johnny seemed to glide through it all, effortlessly delivering results that Mr. Thompson couldn't ignore. It was a slow process, but Johnny knew that the closer they got to promotion season, the more Mr. Thompson would take notice. He had worked too hard to be overlooked now. His strategy was paying off, and the wheels of his plan were turning smoothly. But Johnny wasn't the only one watching. Matt had become increasingly aware of the shift, even if he couldn't pinpoint exactly what was happening. He began to suspect that Johnny, who had always seemed so calm and collected, might be the one behind the whispers, the small comments, and the little hints of imperfection. Matt's nerves were fraying, and his mind was racing with paranoia. Was Johnny trying to sabotage him? The more Matt thought about it, the more certain he became that something was off. But Johnny was clever. He made sure to keep his distance, never overstepping, never drawing attention to himself. He was a master of the slow burn, and every move he made was calculated to ensure that when the time came, he'd be the one who looked like the savior of the office, calm, reliable, and ultimately deserving of the promotion that Matt had once thought was his for the taking. Johnny knew the final phase of his plan was fast approaching. All that was left was for Matt to make one final mistake, one final slip that would send everything crashing down. It would be the moment Johnny had been waiting for. And when it came, he'd be ready to take his place at the top, the true mastermind behind the scenes. The stage was set, and the final act was about to begin. The tension in the office had reached a boiling point. Matt was unraveling, and Johnny could see it in every interaction. He had been careful not to push too hard. After all, the last thing Johnny wanted was for Matt to snap too soon. No, the goal was to let him spiral slowly, building the pressure until it was too much to bear. Johnny knew that once Matt reached his breaking point, the game would be over. And Johnny would be there, poised to pick up the pieces. The last straw came during a high-stakes presentation with a major client. It had been Matt's chance to redeem himself, to regain some of the respect he'd lost in the past few months. He'd worked tirelessly on the project, staying late at the office, poring over every detail. Johnny had heard the murmurs from his colleagues, all of them whispering that this was Matt's big moment. But Johnny knew better. This was the moment where everything would go wrong. The day of the presentation arrived, and the conference room was packed. Johnny could see the tension in Matt's face as he prepared to speak, his hands shaking slightly as he clicked through his slides. Johnny, as always, played the role of the calm observer, leaning back in his chair, watching with a quiet smile as Matt began to present. From the very beginning, it was clear that something was off. Matt's voice wavered as he explained his strategies, his words stumbling over themselves. The slides he had so meticulously crafted were riddled with errors, figures out of place, graphs that didn't match the data, and a complete lack of coherence in his pitch. Johnny watched as Matt's face flushed with embarrassment, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. This was Matt's moment to crumble, and it was happening right in front of him. As the client asked questions, Matt floundered. He stumbled through his answers, barely managing to piece together coherent responses. The once confident employee was now a shell of himself, unable to keep up with the barrage of questions. Johnny knew the client was losing patience, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was the culmination of months of carefully orchestrated sabotage. Matt's own insecurities had caught up with him, and now, the consequences were clear. Johnny waited for the perfect moment. As the client's questions grew more pointed, Matt's frustration reached a breaking point. He snapped, his voice rising in frustration as he tried to justify his mistakes. The client, now visibly annoyed, gave him one last chance to recover. But Matt, already on the edge, lost it completely. He stammered, I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers right here, but I can get them to you later. His voice cracked under the pressure. Johnny could see the look of disappointment in the client's eyes. He could feel the weight of Matt's failure, and for a moment, he almost felt bad for him. But then he reminded himself, Matt had made this bed himself. He had stolen Johnny's work, taken credit for his ideas, and made a fool of him in front of Mr. Thompson time and time again. Now, it was Johnny's turn to finally take his rightful place. The meeting ended in disaster. The client left, politely but curtly, and Matt was left standing in the conference room, his face pale and his shoulders slumped. Johnny stood up, offering a quiet, good job, before leaving the room. He didn't want to gloat, not yet. But he couldn't suppress the feeling of triumph as he walked back to his desk. Word spread quickly throughout the office. Matt had failed, and Johnny had been there, silently watching, quietly orchestrating his downfall. And now, Johnny knew that the promotion he had been working for was within his reach. The weeks leading up to the promotion announcement were tense. Matt's reputation was in tatters, and everyone knew it. Johnny's name, however, was starting to surface more often. He had stepped into salvage projects when Matt couldn't, and his steady performance was gaining recognition from the higher-ups. Mr. Thompson had noticed, though he never said anything outright. It didn't matter. Johnny knew he had played his cards perfectly. Matt, on the other hand, was a mess. His paranoia had turned into a full-blown anxiety attack. He started avoiding the office, calling in sick more often, and when he was there, he was barely functional. His once perfect image had crumbled, and Johnny had made sure of it. The office buzzed with rumors that Matt might be on the chopping block. Johnny, ever the composed strategist, made sure to be seen. He knew the promotion was coming, and he wanted to ensure that when the time came, he would be the one to take it. His work had been flawless. His contributions, though often behind the scenes, had been pivotal. And now, the stage was set for the final act. Johnny could almost taste the victory. Matt's downfall had been slow and steady, a masterpiece of psychological warfare. And as the promotion announcement drew near, Johnny knew he had done everything necessary to secure his future. All that was left was the final move. The tables had turned, and Johnny was ready to claim his prize. The promotion announcement was days away, and Johnny knew that the moment of reckoning was nearly upon him. The pieces were all in place, and Matt, unaware of how deep the hole he'd dug for himself was, continued to spiral. Johnny, however, was calm, collected. He had been waiting for this exact moment. He had watched as Matt made mistake after mistake, as his confidence cracked, and now, Johnny was about to take what was rightfully his. Matt's downfall was obvious to everyone in the office, even if they didn't know the full story behind it. The whispers had started long ago, but now they were louder. The boss, Mr. Thompson, had noticed the shift. The cracks in Matt's performance couldn't be ignored any longer. Johnny had quietly positioned himself as the reliable, competent alternative. The only thing left was for Matt to do something drastic, something that would confirm once and for all that he was no longer fit for the job. And that moment came one morning, just as Johnny had predicted. Matt walked into the office late, his face drawn, his eyes tired and distant. His usual arrogance had vanished, replaced with the kind of defeated energy that Johnny had been waiting for. He made his way to his desk, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and for the first time in months, he didn't hold court in the break room or make small talk. He was a ghost of his former self. Johnny didn't waste any time. He made sure to be seen, taking an extra walk around the office, ensuring that his colleagues saw how effortlessly he moved through the day. He answered emails, fielded questions, and kept up with his work like always. His composure stood in stark contrast to Matt's deteriorating performance. Around noon, Johnny received a message from Mr. Thompson requesting a meeting. The promotion decision was nearing, and Johnny knew this was his moment. He walked into Mr. Thompson's office with a calm smile, a quiet confidence radiating from him. "Johnny, thanks for coming in," Mr. Thompson said, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "I've been reviewing the recent projects and I have to say, I've been impressed with your work. You've really stepped up in the last few months." Johnny nodded, letting the compliment settle in. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson. I've been doing my best to ensure things run smoothly, especially with all the changes happening in the office." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, clearly still considering the situation. "I know it's been a difficult time for the team, especially with Matt's recent performance. He's been under a lot of pressure, and I don't know if it's getting to him or if something else is going on, but I'm not seeing the same level of effort from him that I used to. You, however, have been consistent and reliable." Johnny kept his expression neutral. "I've always believed in doing the work, sir. It's not about recognition, it's about making sure the job gets done." Mr. Thompson nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Well, it certainly hasn't gone unnoticed. You've become the steady hand the team needs. And honestly, I'm thinking it might be time to make a change." Johnny leaned forward, subtly. "A change?" he asked, feigning curiosity. "Yeah. I think it might be time to promote someone who's been reliable, who's shown their capability, and who can help steer the team forward. You've earned it, Johnny." Johnny's heart didn't skip a beat. He had anticipated this moment for weeks. He didn't need to jump up or celebrate. Instead, he remained calm, a quiet smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I won't let you down." As Johnny left the office, his mind was already racing. He hadn't just won the promotion, he had effectively and efficiently orchestrated Matt's downfall. His mind began to process the next steps. He had no interest in rubbing it in Matt's face or making him feel worse than he already did. No, Johnny had already ensured that the damage was done. He had carefully avoided direct confrontation, making Matt's implosion feel like a natural consequence of his own incompetence. Johnny walked through the office with a quiet confidence, knowing that his place at the top was secure. He didn't gloat, didn't brag. He had been subtle, patient, and brilliant. As he passed Matt's desk, he noticed that Matt wasn't there. He probably hadn't even heard the news yet. Johnny had no intention of rubbing it in, but he couldn't help but feel a small, satisfied smirk tug at the corners of his mouth. Later that afternoon, Mr. Thompson made the official announcement. Johnny was now the new lead for their team. The entire office broke into applause, some genuinely pleased for him, others awkwardly looking away. But Johnny didn't need anyone else's approval. He had played the game, and he had won. As he made his way back to his new office, Johnny took a moment to breathe. He had done it. He had patiently waited, quietly maneuvered, and allowed Matt to dig his own grave. Now, Johnny was sitting on top, the very person Matt had once tried to overshadow. But Johnny wasn't done yet. He'd won the promotion, but there was still a score to settle. Matt had not only stolen his work but had made a point to diminish his efforts in front of their boss. Now, it was time for Matt to face the full consequences of his actions. Johnny smiled to himself, knowing that the final part of his plan was just beginning. Johnny had secured the promotion, but his work wasn't done. In the quiet aftermath of his victory, as the new title settled in, Johnny couldn't help but feel the anticipation build inside him. He'd won the battle, but the war, at least the one he'd been waging against Matt, wasn't over. Johnny had already won the top spot, but it wasn't about the title. It was about ensuring Matt understood exactly why he'd fallen, and making sure he never forgot who had orchestrated it. The office buzzed with congratulations. Johnny received a few warm nods from his colleagues, but most people were more focused on Matt's inevitable reaction. The once confident young star was nowhere to be found. After the announcement, he had barely shown his face, retreating to his desk with the kind of defeated posture Johnny had grown so accustomed to seeing. Johnny, however, stayed cool. He played the part of the humble, hard-working employee, grateful for the opportunity, but his mind was already working overtime. This wasn't about just the promotion, it was about ensuring Matt paid for his betrayal. Johnny wasn't angry. He wasn't looking for a fistfight or a screaming match. That was for amateurs. No, Johnny's revenge was far more refined. It was a psychological dismantling that would leave Matt understanding the full weight of his actions. The first part of Johnny's plan kicked into motion the very next day. He made sure to bring up Matt's recent mistakes in casual conversations, weaving them into discussions like they were no big deal. He didn't make it obvious, but he subtly referenced Matt's faltering reports in front of colleagues and even Mr. Thompson, in a way that made it seem like they were just part of the overall picture. He made sure to let people know that it wasn't just the client presentation that had gone poorly, Matt had been slipping for a while. He made sure to underline how Johnny had stepped in to help salvage things. But Johnny wasn't just making Matt look bad in front of others. No, he had something more significant planned. Johnny had been documenting Matt's mistakes over the past few months, each slip, each failure, each moment when Matt had overstepped or stolen credit. He had a meticulous record of Matt's rise and fall, and now was the time to make it public. He crafted a detailed report, a quiet exposé of everything Matt had done wrong, framed in the most professional way possible. It wasn't an attack, it was an honest evaluation of the past few months. Johnny made sure to include Matt's contributions that turned out to be Johnny's work. He even detailed the small but growing signs of Matt's incompetence, his missed meetings, and the escalating frequency of his mistakes. Johnny was meticulous in his wording, making sure it all sounded neutral and factual. He wasn't accusing Matt of anything outright, no, this was simply a recap of events. But Johnny knew that once Mr. Thompson saw the report, he would have no choice but to question Matt's ability to lead the team. After all, Johnny had become the reliable one, the one who had stepped in when things went south. He made sure to highlight how he had always been there to pick up the slack, to back up the team when Matt couldn't handle the pressure. Johnny didn't just send the report directly to Mr. Thompson, though. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, he made sure it was accidentally shared in the office's general folder, the one that everyone had access to. He knew that the moment it landed in Mr. Thompson's inbox, others would inevitably take a look, too. It would only take one or two curious colleagues to start discussing it openly, making sure the contents of the report got into the right hands. Johnny didn't want to seem like the one who was attacking Matt directly, he wanted the rest of the office to see what had happened without him ever lifting a finger. It was a psychological trap. And when it came to Matt, Johnny knew he had to make this moment unforgettable. He waited for the inevitable meeting to occur. It didn't take long for Mr. Thompson to call Matt in. Johnny watched from a distance, knowing that this was the moment Matt would face the consequences of his actions. He didn't know what would happen behind closed doors, but he could already imagine the look on Matt's face as the evidence of his failures was laid out before him. Sure enough, within hours, the office was buzzing with whispers. Matt had been called into Mr. Thompson's office and had been in there for a long time. Johnny couldn't help but smile as he overheard snatches of conversation. Someone had seen Matt storming out of the office, his face red with frustration. Johnny made sure to walk by Matt's desk as the young man slumped in his chair, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. It was the first time Johnny had seen Matt so broken. He had played his part flawlessly. But Johnny wasn't done. He knew that Matt's final downfall had to be complete, and the best way to achieve that was to make sure everyone in the office knew exactly how incompetent Matt had become. After the meeting with Mr. Thompson, Johnny subtly arranged for a team-wide meeting to discuss upcoming projects. It was a subtle move, but Johnny made sure Matt was nowhere to be found during the discussion. In fact, he took the opportunity to ask Mr. Thompson, casually, of course, if there were any new roles or responsibilities Matt would be assuming. It was a slight jab, just enough to make people ask, "Where is Matt?" The silence that followed was telling. People began to look at each other, whispering behind their hands. Johnny could sense the shift. Matt's absence wasn't just because of the meeting, it was because Matt's role was about to become irrelevant. And Johnny? He was now the unquestioned leader of the team. The next morning, Johnny was called into Mr. Thompson's office. This time, it was official. The promotion had been confirmed, and Johnny was now in charge. But Johnny didn't leave it at that. Before he left, he made sure to thank Mr. Thompson for the opportunity, and casually mentioned how hard Matt had been working in the past, but how recently, it had become clear that he wasn't handling the pressure as well as expected. Johnny's words hung in the air. The damage was done. Matt had lost his chance, and Johnny had secured his place at the top. As he left the office, Johnny couldn't help but think about the final touch. He had made sure that when Matt looked around the office, he'd see Johnny, calm and composed, at the helm. And when Matt eventually left the company, because Johnny knew that was the next inevitable step, he would remember the careful, calculated way Johnny had taken everything from him. Johnny smiled, knowing he had finally completed his revenge. The tables had turned, and Matt's fall from grace had been every bit as satisfying as Johnny had imagined. Now, Johnny could truly savor his victory. The office was his. Johnny leaned back in his new office chair, the weight of the last few weeks finally sinking in. The battle had been fought, and he had come out victorious, not with brute force, but with intelligence and patience. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about Matt's ultimate collapse and the quiet satisfaction of watching it unfold, piece by piece, all orchestrated by Johnny. The victory was as sweet as it was deserved, and Johnny wasn't about to let anyone forget it. In the days following his official promotion, Johnny settled into his new role seamlessly. His confidence was palpable, but it was never overbearing. He didn't need to shout from the rooftops about his success. No, his actions spoke louder than any boastful words could. His first team meeting as the new lead was a masterstroke of subtle power. He gave clear directives, handled questions with ease, and made everyone feel like they had a valuable role to play. He made sure to gently remind them that the path to success was about collective effort, something that had always been his philosophy. But as the meeting ended, Johnny couldn't resist one last calculated move. He scheduled one-on-one meetings with his colleagues, giving each person a chance to express their thoughts on the recent shift in leadership. One by one, they came in, offering congratulations or simply stating how glad they were to see him step up. But Johnny made sure to subtly bring up the recent changes, to make sure everyone was aware of who had been the driving force behind the team's recent success. Not that he needed to brag, it was just a gentle reminder that the office had shifted, and Johnny was now the center of it all. As he moved through the days, Johnny could feel the weight of his strategy finally coming to fruition. The office, once buzzing with whispers about Matt's downfall, had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but there was a distinct shift in the air. People were looking to Johnny now, not just as a leader, but as someone who had overcome a challenge no one else had seen coming. His quiet strength was now his most powerful tool. He didn't need to make any overt moves to remind people of his victory. They knew. They all knew. Then came the day that Matt finally made his departure official. It wasn't dramatic, but Johnny had been expecting it. Matt had sent out his resignation, citing personal reasons for leaving the company. Johnny didn't feel a shred of sympathy. He had played the long game, and now it was time for Matt to face the consequences of his actions. He had taken Johnny's work, stolen his credit, and tried to undermine him at every turn. And now, He was gone. Johnny didn't want to appear too pleased, but as he passed Matt's now empty desk, he couldn't help but notice how the space seemed to reflect the emptiness of Matt's career at that point. There were no last-minute reports, no frantic emails, no more stolen ideas. Just a nameplate, collecting dust. Johnny had made sure of that. But Johnny's sense of satisfaction didn't come from Matt's resignation alone. No, it came from the subtle, psychological destruction he had unleashed on Matt. He hadn't just beaten Matt, he had made him doubt everything he once believed about his own abilities. Johnny had made Matt's failures feel like a natural consequence of his actions, no direct confrontation, no public humiliation, just a slow, careful process of eroding his confidence until there was nothing left. As the weeks turned into months, Johnny's reputation only solidified. He was seen as the leader who had taken charge when things were at their lowest, the one who brought stability and innovation to the team. His steady hand guided the office through the turbulence that Matt's departure had caused. Johnny had proven himself to be more than just a survivor of office politics, he had become its master. Then, just when Johnny thought everything had fallen into place, something unexpected happened. Mr. Thompson called him into his office one afternoon. Johnny was prepared for the usual updates, the strategic discussions, but this time, there was a hint of something different in Mr. Thompson's demeanor. "Johnny," Mr. Thompson began, his tone more serious than usual, "I've been thinking about the way things played out with Matt. You handled the transition well, no question about it. But I want you to be aware of something." Johnny raised an eyebrow, not sure where this conversation was going. "What's that, sir?" "Matt's performance had been deteriorating for a while," Mr. Thompson continued, "and while we both know you've stepped up, there's something I've been keeping an eye on. A few of the higher-ups are starting to take notice of how things played out with him." Johnny kept his expression neutral, though inside, he felt a flicker of tension. What was Mr. Thompson getting at? "I'm not saying anything about your leadership," Mr. Thompson said quickly, as if reading Johnny's thoughts. "But I've been asked to look into the circumstances surrounding Matt's departure. They want to know how much of this was just natural turnover, and how much might have been the result of, well, office dynamics." Johnny's heart raced for just a split second, but he quickly regained his composure. He had nothing to hide. He hadn't done anything wrong. Everything he had done was calculated, yes, but it had been for the good of the company. Still, he had to tread carefully. This was the moment where he needed to control the narrative. "Well, sir," Johnny said smoothly, "I've always believed that a leader's job is to guide the team through challenges. When someone like Matt falters, it's a reflection of their ability to handle the pressure. I simply stepped in and did what was necessary to keep things running smoothly." Mr. Thompson nodded, clearly satisfied with Johnny's response. "Exactly. That's the kind of leadership we need. Just make sure to keep an eye on the dynamics in the office moving forward. We want to avoid any perception of toxic behavior or sabotage." Johnny smiled. "Of course, sir. I'll always prioritize the team's well-being." With that, the conversation ended, and Johnny walked out of Mr. Thompson's office, feeling a rush of satisfaction. He had been careful not to cross any lines. He had won, but he had done it in such a way that no one could ever accuse him of anything underhanded. The narrative was now fully under his control, and it was clear that Matt's failure was simply the result of his own inability to keep up. Johnny had won. But now, he had the opportunity to shape the office for the better. The long game was over, and Johnny had come out on top, without a single direct confrontation. Matt was gone, and Johnny's place was solidified. The office was his, and everyone knew it. It was a victory, but it was only just the beginning of Johnny's rise. There was more to achieve, more moves to make. Johnny knew that he had only just begun. Johnny stood at his office window, watching as the city buzzed below. The view was a sharp reminder of everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed. His new role as team lead wasn't just a title. It was the culmination of a long, careful journey, one built on patience, strategy, and an unyielding drive for success. He'd orchestrated Matt's downfall with precision, watching from the sidelines as his former colleague's world crumbled. And now, Johnny was the one at the top. As the weeks passed, Johnny's leadership became more solidified. The office that had once been a battleground for recognition was now a place of steady growth and productivity under his guidance. People began to look to him for direction, and Johnny was more than ready to provide it. He wasn't just a manager, he was the one who had navigated the storm, who had ensured that the team kept moving forward while others faltered. But even with all his success, Johnny didn't let up. He had made his way to the top, but that didn't mean he was about to stop playing the game. He knew that the higher you climbed, the more attention you attracted, and the more dangerous it became. There were whispers in the office, conversations around the water cooler, and Johnny made sure to be a part of every one. He didn't need to dominate the conversation, he simply needed to steer it. He had learned that the best leaders weren't always the loudest ones, they were the ones who knew when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to move just behind the scenes, manipulating things to their advantage. As time went on, Johnny became more than just the person everyone looked to for answers. He was the one who made the decisions, who quietly influenced the direction of the company. But he didn't let his power consume him. He was subtle, always calculating, always moving behind the scenes. He made sure to distribute praise evenly, to share credit, and to ensure that his team felt appreciated. It was a masterclass in leadership, but also in manipulation. Johnny knew that the more he made them feel valued, the more they would be willing to follow him. Behind closed doors, Johnny's influence grew. He had made sure that his projects were the ones that thrived. His ideas, once overshadowed by Matt, were now the ones that carried the team forward. And as he executed his plans, Johnny made sure that everything aligned in his favor. He had mastered the art of getting people to do exactly what he wanted, while making them think it was their idea all along. It was all part of the game. He wasn't just playing for today, he was playing for the long haul. Matt's absence had been felt, but only for a short time. As soon as Matt was gone, Johnny stepped into his shoes with ease. The role he had once dreamed of was now his. But Johnny didn't stop there. He knew that there would always be someone gunning for his spot. There would always be someone who wanted to take what he had earned. So Johnny kept his eyes open, always assessing the next threat, always one step ahead. One afternoon, Johnny received a call from an unexpected source, someone from HR, someone he hadn't spoken to much during his time at the company. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but Johnny could tell there was something more. "Mr. Thompson would like to meet with you," the HR representative said. "It's about future opportunities." Johnny's mind raced, but his exterior remained calm. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "When would be a good time?" Later that afternoon, Johnny sat across from Mr. Thompson once again. This time, the atmosphere was different. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. Mr. Thompson's face was serious, his eyes sharp. Johnny had long since stopped being intimidated by the man. Instead, he saw him as a stepping stone, someone he had outplayed, someone who had simply been in the way. "Johnny, I've been meaning to speak with you about your progress," Mr. Thompson began. "You've exceeded expectations. But we both know that your journey here hasn't been without its challenges." Johnny smiled inwardly but kept his face neutral. "I've always believed in taking on challenges head-on," he replied, keeping his tone measured. "I've always believed that the real growth happens when we're pushed outside of our comfort zones." Mr. Thompson nodded, clearly weighing his words. "Exactly. And in light of that, I wanted to discuss some upcoming projects, some potential opportunities for growth. We're looking at expanding, and I want to offer you the chance to lead the next phase of development." Johnny's pulse quickened, but he didn't let it show. "That sounds like a great opportunity," he said, maintaining his composure. "I'm always up for a new challenge." There's just one thing, Mr. Thompson continued, his gaze intense. There are some people who have concerns. Concerns about the way things have been handled in the past. Johnny's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. Concerns? About what, exactly? He asked, feigning ignorance. Matt's departure was sudden, Mr. Thompson said, watching Johnny closely. There have been whispers about how things played out. We've seen your success, Johnny, but I need to know that we won't run into the same issues again in the future. Johnny knew exactly what this was about. This wasn't an inquiry into his ability to lead, it was a check, a final test. Mr. Thompson wanted to see if Johnny could handle the heat. He wanted to see if Johnny could hold his ground. Mr. Thompson, Johnny said calmly, I've always handled things professionally. I stepped up when Matt couldn't. I've delivered results, and I've always put the company first. If that's what you're asking, then you have my word that I will continue to do so. Mr. Thompson studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. I appreciate that, Johnny. We all know how competitive this industry can be. But I want you to remember, integrity, leadership, and the ability to inspire those around you. That's what matters. Keep that in mind, and you'll go far. Johnny stood up, offering a firm handshake. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Thompson. I won't let you down. As Johnny left Mr. Thompson's office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. The final test had been passed. And now, Johnny was poised to take on whatever came next. There was no one who could stand in his way. He had built his empire with patience, with cunning, and with an unshakable resolve. No one, Matt, Mr. Thompson, or anyone else, could take that from him. Johnny was at the top, and there was nowhere left to go but up. The rain had only just begun.